I'm going to be talking to John McDougall, who's the CEO of Edmonton-based startup SynBioBlox. They have got what appears to be a revolutionary new process to turn organic processes into synthetic, i.e. aviation fuel, amongst others, products. Now, I don't understand any of the science behind this, but I'm fascinated to learn, and I'm sure you will be too. So welcome to the interview, John.
Well, thanks very much, Mark. I'm glad to be here.
Like this, when I said I don't understand the science, I wasn't kidding. I mean, I've seen CRISPR mentioned in various articles, and that's my entire understanding of the tools and the technology that you use. Can you give us a very simple layman's explanation of your company's innovation, please?
Okay. The simplest way to think about this is we essentially want to take Mother Nature, things that exist to some degree, and industrialize them and make them much more productive and much more focused on the things we want them to do. So essentially, we do that using what's called synthetic biology. Synthetic biology is the ability to essentially take pieces from one organism and put them in another and sort of manipulate the way organisms like bacteria or whatever actually work. The trouble with that is these tools that you've talked about, CRISPR, and the ability you maybe hear about predicting protein folding and different things like that. That's all great, and they're necessary tools, but genomes are incredibly complicated. Small bacteria, the DNA has, millions of base pairs. Human beings have 3 billion, just to give you a sense, in their DNA. And the challenge is that in order to be able to work with those in a productive way rather than in a trial and error way, didn't exist until the advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning that allow us to work with these massive amounts of data and sort out really what's going on and where we could intervene productively.
So if I understand this correctly, you have created a data bank of genetic information on these microorganisms that can take greenhouse gases and turn them into something else that might be useful. You then take that, because now you have this database, you can take AI and machine learning tools, identify those genetic components that might work together, and then use your gene editing tools to create the organism you want to turn greenhouse gases into something useful like aviation fuel. Is that a reasonable explanation?
That's pretty close. You only miss one piece, and that is the databases exist. This data is all over the world. The problem has been the tools to actually work with it. And so we have tools where we can go out and we can hunt down all the data that exists in particular areas and do it very quickly. We can figure out how these genetics work using artificial intelligence and machine learning. We can visualize them and create ways of seeing what's going on very, very simply. And so simply, in fact, that almost anybody could probably figure out how to improve the genetics of one organism versus another. It's really quite amazing. So with those tools, right, we're able to do things that used to take 8 or 10 or years or longer, and do it in months, and take the cost structure down 1 or 2 times one or two orders of magnitude as well. So we really speed things up. And we do all our design to spec. So we say, here's what we want the organism to do. We specify what it has to be able to do. Then we simply make that so that it can.
Okay, that's fascinating. And the first thing that popped into my head as an old English lit major in university many decades ago is Frankenstein. Mm-hmm. We're putting all the pieces together, and then you come up with we won't call it a monster, but we come up with another being.
To some degree, that's correct. I wouldn't call it Frankenstein or a monster, but I know the terminology, and you hear about it. The trick is, by doing this on an industrial platform, First of all, we contain the processes, so they're not out in nature just basically wandering around and potentially causing trouble. Secondly, you can build into the genetics what we might simply call a kill switch, which says if it gets out into the real world, it just says, hey, I don't see what I really want, so I'm going to die. And you can control things to a degree that way. So the challenges that people worry about are much reduced.
Now, okay, SynBioBlox created the Bioconversion Databank Foundation. You
Right.
also created Maximizer TM, which is a free open research portal for synthetic biology.
Right.
Okay, so there's two innovations that you've done. What then is the innovation, the new technology that you bring to the table to create these organisms that will, for instance, make sustainable aviation fuel?
Okay, so really, as I said earlier, we're just taking Mother Nature and we're kind of accelerating her and reinforcing her processes. But the fact is that before this, we largely were working on the basis of hope, right? So the challenges the world faces today are ginormous, is the best way to characterize it. Greenhouse gases are one problem, but so is all the garbage we throw away, all the waste we create, all of the different things that are problems for the world. The solution to that's going to be biology, because if you can harvest what Mother Nature typically does, because Mother Nature does deal with most of these things. The problem is it takes too long, too big a footprint, and occasionally it just misses the boat because it hasn't gotten anything near where the problem is. But the reality is, nature does a lot of that stuff today. So we're with these tools. We have really created the ability for people to say, what's the problem I wanted to solve? And here's how I go about it. Our biggest challenge, actually, having created those tools, was to decide what to do with them. And so we chose aviation fuel because, first of all, it's a very big greenhouse gas contributor. Over 2% of the world's emissions come from flying around. The fuels they currently use have a magnifying effect that increases the effective greenhouse gas impact on the world by almost twice. So now you're up to somewhere around 4%. And that means that that's a billion ton a year problem against the 50 billion tons of emissions that we have in the world, right? Without the fires that we have today.
Now, you've created a cleaner and energy-dense jet fuel named ActiveX.
Yep.
Tell us about that, and tell us how you made that.
Okay. So the process is to say, what did we want? Well, we wanted jet fuel. So when you start to say you need jet fuel, you create first the specs that you have to achieve. So you've got to have energy density. You've got to have a molecule that will not gel up in cold weather because they fly in minus 60. And you have to be able to meet the other requirements of the standards bodies. So that is, in effect, the specification we put to work. Then you say, all right, where are there capabilities in organisms that do some of that kind of stuff? And so we identify the type of organisms that, in fact, might have the potential to do that. And, then you say, okay, how do we make an organism that is, better, faster, cheaper than it would be if it's just left to its own? And that's the point where we intervene with synthetic biology. And then we still have the problem, which is non-trivial, which is then you go and say, all right, now I've got to scale that process up. So the organism, when you're in biological processes, typically, as I say, they tend to be left on their own. You need an ocean or a forest or whatever to get quantity. So we're trying to compress that onto an industrial scale. And so we do that by enhancement and messing around with the organisms that are doing the productive work for us.
Okay, so you've identified the organisms. presumably using your AI and machine learning tools. You've then taken the other tools and you've engineered yourself an organism that will make you ActiveX, the synthetic aviation fuel. And so now you've got this creation in the lab. How then do you scale it up? Do you use like a biodigester, or do you use some other known technology, or do you have to create that?
Well, you have to create the system that applies to the specific thing you're trying to do, but the components that you're going to use, depends on, in the case of making jet fuel, ideally what we want is a continuous process, not a batch process, because the quantities are so large, right? So you quickly go down that route, and then you've got to create an environment in which these little buggers like to live and multiply and, spew this stuff out. So you do that first at very small scale, typically in about a milk carton size, and then you gradually step up. And in biology, the steps are not trivial, because what you need is a consistent environment in the process. So if part of it is dead and the other part is very active, you need the whole thing to be active. So you have design work to do to achieve that. And so you tend to step it up from a liter or two to 20 to 200 to 2,000 to 10,000 to 100,000. And those steps are, again, facilitated by these models and other tools that we've built that allow us to play with a lot of stuff digitally without having to do it in the lab.
Okay. Where are you at the milk carton stage, or are you at some much larger scale than that?
This particular point, we're at the milk carton stage. The difference is we expect to be moving past that stage again in about a year. And as we move to other products, that'll accelerate almost for sure. But again, the fact we're doing so much digitally is what's really driving this.
Okay, so all the work gets done on a computer in a digital environment, so that you can design much faster than if you were tinkering in the lab, let's say.
Right. That's right.
Now, the University of Alberta is involved in this. Alberta Innovates, which is the province's innovation agency, is involved with this. I understand you're seeking $1.5 million of investment. If the federal government, for example, has I don't know how many funds they have now for innovation support, and that's scaling up, commercializing, that sort of thing. But this sounds like your process and your technology seems custom made for that kind of support. It sounds like this is an environment, political environment, government environment, policy environment, in which it should be easy. They should be throwing money at you to scale this up. Is that the case?
I wouldn't say they're throwing it, but they are certainly encouraging us. And just to give you a little context, I've been around in this space, not synthetic aviation fuel, but around the R&D and innovation space for a long time. I ran the National Research Council, for example. But I've also been in business, and so I come at it from an engineer's perspective of mission orientation. And so we know that there's loads of programs around to support, and the money that we're raising will get leveraged, probably 2 or 3 times because of those programs. But you still need to be able to contribute yourself. They won't just give you money to do it all and say have a wonderful time. They will say, show you can bring some money to the table so that you can, in fact, that's their, I guess you would say, evidence of truth.
Well, it's due diligence on the part of public agencies, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah, and there's some rationale behind that, so that we're not just handing out bushel loads of public dollars to anybody who comes along and asks for it. But it sounds like, John, like I've interviewed I don't know how many startups and other folks who are involved in this innovation space, and they're all going through a version of what you're going through. And it sounds like, to take it from the first stage off the lab, the milk carton scale, and get it up through these other step changes so that you can scale it up to commercial. It sounds like you're well on your way. So give us a bit of a time frame as to what you expect in terms of how long it'll take to scale it up.
We think that you could be flying this around within 5 years. Now, compared to other things, as I mentioned, what we've done so far, just in terms of the model building and the capabilities that we've created and where we stand, most companies have taken a decade to do what we've done in 10 months. So that's and the cost is down accordingly, right? So it's a very efficient use of money, but it still requires the scale up process is the thing that takes time. We think it will squeeze with the tools we've got significantly, but it won't go away. It's still going to be an issue. And I'm just going to add, there's a capital requirement each time you take a step as well.
Sure, fair enough. I want to finish up our conversations, John, by asking you how your innovation might fit into the government of Alberta's plan to capture carbon, because there are all sorts of. There's already a carbon trunk line in Alberta, up near Edmonton. Actually, there's another one planned from the oil sands. There are all sorts of carbon capture and storage projects underway. Does that essentially provide you with a low-cost feedstock?
Well, there are various low-cost feedstocks. The ultimate ones are ones that people are not doing anything with and are sort of throwing away. CO2 is probably the most prevalent of that. Methane is a much more serious greenhouse gas in terms of its impact than CO2. There's still lots being emitted in various places, from landfills, from sewage plants, and so on, where we could get our hands on it. We're talking to people about that. So the key is to try to solve the overall problem, and ultimately, I would expect we'll see plants hooked up to smokestacks, if I could put it in that term, of large emitters, and we'll be gathering from places where it is being emitted in a less intense way, but is still very important because they're big emissions collectively.
Well, John, good luck to your team. This sounds like a fascinating project. We look forward here at Energy Media to following your progress, and hopefully we'll have you back in a year, and you'll be maybe from the milk carton to an egg crate or something like that.
Well, I think we'll be farther than that, actually. But thank you as well. And just we've really turned this game on its head. This is a real game changer potentially.